Hey guys, welcome and ting. And we're going back to Scotland, and this one is called Who Made the Scottish People? The Scotch-Irish. So we're gonna go in here and look at this up and thank you all for all the comments and all the suggestions of videos to watch. And I'm going through them bit by bit, y'all. Take it to ting. Let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what we could learn about the Scottish people.
Ulster Scots, Scotch-Irish, planters, improvers, oppressors. Different folks have different names for the people forged by their arrival along this coastline. But how did it really start? That's a story of intrigue and opportunism that's easily forgotten. If you're interested in people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Here in the 17th century, a people were fashioned through tempest and fire, Bible and sword. Depending on whether you're a descendant of one of those people living here or abroad, a modern Irish Republican, or for that matter, a modern Scot, you might have very different views of the people forged in that fire. The well-rehearsed story is of James VI becoming James I of England and his strategy of confiscating land and planting people after the flight of the Earls in Ulster in 1607. But today, I want to dig a little bit deeper into a story probably little known outside this province. A story of private ambition, a story of greed, intrigue, prison break, opportunity, and one man's ambition.
All right.
I found the details in a book, The Scottish Migration.
See, that's the thing about history, man. It's got the word story in the word, his story. And one of the things I used to do when I was reading history books back home is to just read it as if it was a story being told. And so at some point later sort of connect the truth to it. I don't know if that makes sense. Because for some reason, if you say history, everybody think it's boring, right? It's a bunch of facts and stuff about back then, but there were stories back then that were being told. And I think in some way in schools, people have gotten better at storytelling what history is, was, or what perceives to be, depending on where you are. When I was growing up on the island, the teachers really made it like a story, it's the story of your past. Whereas instead of just dates and times to indoctrinate and become patriotic, let's say, but more of an understanding of the human existence or the human way of living, because it's a story that's been told, but it more than likely happened. Depending on who is telling the story, you know what I'm saying? Let's get back to this here.
To Ulster by Percival Maxwell. I'll leave a link in the description. 2 months after being crowned King of England, James I, as he was to them, granted lands in Ulster to the Scotsman Sir Randall MacDonald. But that was really only rubber stamping a reality on the ground created during the reign of Elizabeth. But this official grant said that MacDonald had to break the land into manors and put a strong house on each. Now, given that England's 9-year war against indigenous Irish had only ended 6 days after Elizabeth's death, strong houses probably weren't a bad idea, depending on whose side you were on. Don't make that mistake over here. Anyway, our story really starts here with another Scot. He was an Ayrshire laird called Hugh Montgomery, or Wee Shug to his pals. He was an ex-military man and a crafty lad. His brother had emigrated to England in 1584, and he'd been in Elizabeth's good graces during her lifetime. Wee Shug's southern brother would send information back north to...
I don't know what it is about a body of water, but for some reason, maybe because I'm from an island, a body of water signifies peace to me, especially if it's just there nice and calm with just a little bit of ripples to it. And him walking through this area just seems so peaceful to me. Like where I am, I guess it depends on the body of water too, because I don't really feel that safe close to the Ohio River, but I feel safe to the Caribbean Ocean. I don't know if that makes more sense there.
Shug, who'd send it on to James VI, and before long, Shuggy Montgomery had earned his Brownie badge for spying. What's more, when James made his way down to London to try his buttocks on the big seat, who was one of the Scottish gentlemen that went with? But wee Shug fae Ayrshire. He took the opportunity to catch up with his ever-alert brother, and they decided between them that now that the 9-Year War was over and a Scottish king was on the English throne, Ireland was the place of opportunity. Now, by a stroke of luck, the Gaelic chief of County Down, Big Con O'Neill, had been languishing here in Carrickfergus Castle with little to look forward to but a head chopping. England's Lord Deputy of Ireland had locked Big Con up for rebellion against Elizabeth, although Con himself described it as a fight in the pub. Don't you just love the Irish? Back over the water in Ayrshire, wee Shug Montgomery saw this as his opportunity to get hold of some Irish land. He would help Big Con escape in return for half his estate. So, depending on who you believe, wee Shug engineered Big Con O'Neill's escape by arranging to bribe the jailer and seduce the jailer's daughter. Now, why you need to seduce the daughter when you've already bribed the jailer, I haven't quite worked out. So maybe it was Big Con's wife who smuggled rope into his cell inside a piece of meat. And then she seduced the jailer's daughter. Either way, Big Con escaped and hid in the steeple of Bangor's church for a few days before wee Shuggy had him ferried the short distance to Ayrshire coast and confirmed the deal. Somehow, when Shug was down at court in London trying to negotiate Con O'Neill's pardon from James first, another Scotsman gets wind of it. Now, what can I say about James Hamilton? St Andrews educated lecturer and fellow at Trinity College Dublin, Dublin agent for James and Elizabeth's later reign, the man who had awaited Elizabeth's death in London with fresh horses strategically placed at points north so that he could race to Edinburgh and be the first person to inform James that his kingdom had come. Sleek it. That's what I'd say. Sleek it. If you won a high-stakes poker game and you laid down your cards to show a fox of clubs, a snake of spades, a jack, queen, king of thistles, he'd convince the king of thistles that we might as well split the pot. Sleek it is my point. In August 1604, he wangled his way into the card game. He managed to convince the king that Big Con O'Neill's land should be divided in a three-way split. O'Neill would get a third of what was originally his. Shug Montgomery gets a third, and Sleek It Foxy Hamilton gets a third. And the king duly agreed. Now, if you were a sleek it, ambitious fox in the make, what would you do next? Well, on the 6th of December 1604, the king issued a letter in favour of a London merchant who, in a quirk of coincidence, was conveniently named Thomas Ireland. In return for a payment of £1,678, 6 shillings and 8 pence, Thomas Ireland was to be given enough Irish land for an annual income of £100. How much land is that? The letter said, so much of the lands in the 2 R's in the province of Ulster, he or his nominee shall think fit to be parcel. That's a blank cheque. It was a blank cheque that 2 months later, Thomas Ireland signed over to James Foxy Hamilton. No, he's going to stitch you up like a kipper! So, Foxy Hamilton became the first Scot to get a legal title to land in County Down on Ireland's northeast coastline.
Oh,
2
wow.
months before the King's letter authorising the three-way deal with Big Con, Wee Shug and Foxy himself was signed.
There was some serious politicking going on there, you know what I mean?
On the 16th of April, 1605. Even in that letter, Oliver Neil's estate was to be given first to the Fox, and then he would split it amongst the three later. Now, part of the deal was that they had to promise to inhabit the said territory and lands with English or Scotchmen. Foxy Hamilton and Shug Montgomery were knighted, and the previously rebellious Con O'Neill was granted some of his own lands back from the Crown. Now, the reason that this rebellious type was allowed lands confiscated by the Crown was that they weren't deemed confiscated as a result of Con O'Neill's pub brawl rebellion, but because of the attainder of one of his kinsmen based here at Eden Duff Carrick, also known as Shane's Castle on the banks of Loch Ness. Now that I'm on the subject of Big Con, remember that Lord Deputy of Ireland who had him imprisoned in Carrickfergus at the start of all this? Well, it seems that he and Foxy Hamilton started cooperating to their mutual benefit. And remember that letter from King James, the blank cheque granting however much land as was needed? Well, it turns out that Sleekit and Sleekiter used it to get their hands on way more property than
Of course they did.
Once a property had been acquired by the Crown, they just added it to the territory covered by the letter, and bingo! The fox was in the hen coop. Between July 1605 and May 1608, Hamilton received more than 5 separate grants. Once he'd got hold of a title, he would sell it or pass it on to deserving people. A bit like if you clicked the link in the description below and bought me a coffee as a wee tip for making these videos. Now, I'm only a visitor here, and this may be old hat to folk who actually live in Ulster, but the reason that this story interested me was that you tend to read of the plantations of Scots in English starting when James confiscated lands here following what's known as the flight of the Earls. I'll make a video about that actually whilst I'm here, but the point is that these events tell us that Scots were flooding over the Irish Sea on a 3-hour boat ride before the flight of the Earls took place. This was an opportunistic private plantation of Scots before the Crown even realised there was going to be the prospect for the state-sponsored colonisation a few years later. What had been O'Neill lands were now being settled by some English, but predominantly Scots, taking the trip over that narrow stretch of Irish Sea.
Oh, wow.
County Down and Antrim were occupied by the gentlemen farmers, retinues and tradesmen who followed, providing a bridgehead for further trade, transport and, let's be honest, a bit of suppression of the local people. Hamilton and Montgomery just wanted to make money. But for the Crown, suppression of the locals was always part of the plan. Grants were given with conditions that the landholders build a castle or a strong house within 8 years. The Crown knew that trouble would come. And of course it did. The English Civil War's bloody clash between King and Parliament was conceived in Edinburgh's St Giles Cathedral on the 23rd of July, 1637. But the head crowned here in Ulster 4 years later. That's a long pregnancy. The Scots who endured evolved a unique identity and their own form of the Scots language and Presbyterian faith, but close enough to pop back and watch the Rangers at the weekend. Of course, you don't need me to tell you that division between the indigenous Irish and the newcomers has continued for hundreds of years. And those watching the USA don't need me to tell you that the first huge influx of Scots to America didn't come from the Highlands during the clearances, but lowland Ulster Scots making that leap across a much larger ocean from here a few generations after arriving.
Oh, wow.
Over the years, they provided numerous presidents, generals, and men of eminence. But now, you know how it all began. If you want to understand more about James VI and his relationship with the Gael, there's another video coming up on screen now.
Wow. Now, here's the thing about the world as we know it from my perspective here. History is cool, knowing where you're from is cool and all of that. But with all the migrations of people all over this world, all the mixing going on, how could anybody say I'm pure this or I'm pure that unless they say I'm pure human being? I'm not saying being proud of who you are or your ethnicity or your color. I'm not saying anything is wrong with that. I'm just saying that in essence we all kind of like human beings here, you know. It's just the main thing that we have in common. At some point, doesn't that part of it comes before anything else? Because without each other we wouldn't survive. Maybe years and years ago people might be self-sufficient, but we have created a world where nobody's self-sufficient anymore. Be it because of greed, capitalism, whatever ism you want to talk about, here we are. And we got to start learning how to live within the not so much within the confines, but within the idea or mentality that we could survive this living a nice, quiet, peaceful life and enjoying the one that we get. We get one, y'all, one life. We should be enjoying it. I'm gonna leave a link in the description for this video here. And hey, if you like what you see here, drop a like on the video for me, and keep the comments coming, keep the suggestions coming. I'm really enjoying it. I hope you guys are too. You all take care of each other. Cool runnings.